this series of videos, I'm going to be building out the UI for Airbnb's Explore tab from scratch. I'm doing this as an exercise in figuring out how to achieve some of the various effects that you see in popular apps, and I chose Airbnb because I thought it had several great examples. This is not intended to be used for anything other than educational purposes, and all my code is available at the repo linked below if you want to follow along and build it yourself. Before we get started, I have a few disclaimers. All the illustrations we're using in the app, I just took screenshots of the actual Airbnb app and cropped them down to size. For the fonts and colors and icons, we're just going to use the closest thing that's available to us from the system. So we're just using San Francisco for all of the fonts and icons. I'm pretty sure the font and icons that Airbnb uses, you'd have to license. So if you want to take that step, you can do it yourself, but we're not going to do it for this series. We will also not handle any of the business logic. We're going to hard code all of the data and not handle any user actions. This isn't really meant to be production code. It's just an exploration of the UI techniques. And finally, the Airbnb app looks different now than the time when I started writing this series. So we're going to work off of this screenshot that I took of the Airbnb app when I first started, and this kind of spec that I have built out over here, which is what the Airbnb app looked like when I started the series. It does look different currently, but the structure is basically the same. So if you wanted to update the assets, you could make it look exactly like the current one if you cared to do that, but we're not going to for the series of videos because I have to draw the line somewhere. So this is what we'll be building out. We're going to use UI collection view and compositional layouts to achieve these different sections and looks, and then make the logic for this header collapsing animation. But before we get to that, we need to set up a project and lay some groundwork that will make our lives easier down the road. I'm literally starting from scratch. All I have is this one XC assets folder that we'll use that has all of the images, and that is available in the repo if you want to grab just that. Or if you want to skip over this video and go on to the next one where we actually start writing some code and not just messing around with Xcode projects, you're welcome to do that too. You can grab the part 1 branch from the repo, and that will be where we end this video. Okay, so first thing I'm going to do is make a new project. So I'm going to open Xcode, however you do that in your context. And it's made it on my other screen, so I'm going to grab it and drag it over here. I'm going to use this to take up the full screen. We're going to make a iOS app. I'm going to call it Airbnb Home. It needs to be a storyboard app and a UI kit app delegate, lifecycle, language Swift. We don't care about tests or core data. I'm just going to throw it on the desktop. So the first thing we need to do here is set up the storyboard. So I'm going to go to main.storyboard. This is just going to give us the overall structure for the app. So I'm going to embed this in a tab bar controller, the view controller we get for free, because our main structure has a tab bar. I'm going to pull it down below, just because that's how I like to organize my tab bars. Then we're going to add another view controller. Down here, and if you control drag from the tab controller to this and click on view controllers under relationship segue, it'll embed it. And then we just need to do that 3 more times to end up with 5 tabs. These other view controllers are just going to be blank. I'm just adding them so that we can get the tabs so that the overall interface looks the same. If you wanted to build out other parts of the app, that's a good exercise to do on your own if you'd like. But we're just building this one tab. Okay. Now we've got a tab controller overall with 5 tabs. So next we need to update the image tint. So I'm going to click on the tab bar itself and grab image tint here. We're going to use System Pink because that's close enough to Airbnb's brand color for our purposes. And you can see they're all now showing as pink down here. So I'm going to click on the first item, call it Explore, and use the magnifying glass image. Then the next one is going to be saved, and we're going to use heart. The next one is trips, and I'm going to use scribble dot variable because that's the closest one I could find to Airbnb's logo in the system icons. Then we'll have inbox and message for this one, and then finally profile and person dot circle. There we go. Now those all look correct. I'm going to run this on a 12 Pro. So I can set it next to this 11 Pro and we can see our spec versus our current working version. Let's make this a little bigger so they're roughly even in size. There we go. We've got our tab bar. It's a good start. Next, we need to pull in the asset catalog. So I'm going to delete this existing one. Just move it to trash. And then open the desktop folder and grab this assets folder and drag it in. We'll copy items if needed. There we go. So that gives us all the assets we're going to use. Again, I just took these as screenshots from the app and cropped them down to size. And they're available in the repo if you want to get that asset catalog. Next, I like to pull all the things that I don't care about into a folder called resources, which is everything except the view controller right now. So I'm going to click on info.plist and hold shift to select these, and then hold command to grab these other two. And I'm going to make a new group from selection called resources. That just lets me hide that stuff that I don't care about seeing. Now if we try to build, it's not going to run because it can't find the info.plist file because the path has changed. So we need to go to the project in the navigator, go to build settings. Yep, build settings. We're going to scroll down to the packaging section. And then here we have the path for the info.plist file. We just need to add resources in there. Now if we try to build, it'll succeed. Cool. All right, next we're going to rename this view controller to be something that means something to us, not just a generic term. So I'm going to use the rename function to call this home view controller because this will be our home view. Next, we need to pull in some helper stuff. So first we're going to add a Swift package dependency called Anchorage. From RightPoint, this one. The default settings are fine. Just let it resolve. Finally. Okay, there we've got anchorage. Now this is just going to let us do our constraints a little more concisely and easier to read. Next, we're going to add a file called programmatic view. I went over this in a different video called How I Lay Out UI Code in Swift. So I'm not going to talk about it here, but it will just be the base class for all of our views so that they're a little cleaner. And that is going to look like this. It's just going to be a class called programmatic view. It's a subclass of UI view. We're getting rid of the required init from coder because we don't care about that. And then we have these two template methods, configure and constrain, which is how I organize my programmatic views. And those will get called by default by the superclass. And so all we need to do is override those in our views. Next, we're going to add some helper functions on UI view and UI stack view, which are just conveniences that I like. You don't have to do this if you don't want. We're going to make a new group called extensions and a new file called UI view plus helpers. We need to import UI kit and we need to import UI kit and then have an extension on UI view, which is a function called add sub views. It's going to take a variadic parameter of UI view, and then it's just going to go through each of those. And add them as a subview. Then we're going to have basically the same extension in UI stack view, which adds them as arranged subviews. Cool. That gets us those. We're also going to add a helper function on UI image, which I don't know why it's not built into the system, but it is not. So we'll just add it here to make our lives easier. And it is going to look like this. We're going to import UI kit. It's going to be a convenience initializer that takes an optional string. And all it's going to do is check that we have a name. And then initialize ourself. So UI image already has this initializer. It's a failable initializer called named name, and it takes a non-optional string, but it's already a failable initializer. So all this does is pass that through. It lets us pass in an optional string, and the initializer unwraps it instead of us having to do it at the call site every time. So this will just make our code a little bit cleaner. I'm also, right now, while we're adding all these, I'm going to add a file for UI font plus custom. And this is, we're not going to do anything in here right now. This is just how I organize my custom fonts to keep them abstracted away. So this is just going to be the place where we add our custom fonts. Later. Okay, now we need a view. And we have all the helpers in place to build it. So we're going to add a new file called home view. We need to import anchorage here as well. And this is going to be a class called home view, which is a programmatic view. All we're going to do for right now is in the configure function, set the background color equal to system pink. That way we can see it. Then in our home view controller, we're going to have the main view of the view controller be a home view. So we're going to say private view for. We don't need view did load right now, so I'm just going to delete that. But what we do need is to override load view. And here what we're going to do is say view equals content view. Again, I explained these patterns in my laying out UI code in Swift video, so I'm not going into detail on them here, but this is going to work. Okay, so now if we run the app, we should see a nice big pink screen, assuming it compiles and I didn't mistype anything. Yep, there we go. So now we have a home view set as our view for the main view controller. The rest of them will be white because we haven't done anything there. Now we're going to add a header view. The logic for the header is kind of complex. So we're going to pull it out to its own file so that it can kind of be abstracted away from our home view. And if you needed to pull that header in multiple places in the app, you could then do it that way as well. Okay, we're going to import anchorage and UI kit. We're going to have another class called header view. It's also going to be a programmatic view. And here for now, we're just going to set the background color equal to system teal. Again, so we can see it when we use it. Now, finally, for the purposes of this series, we need a model to hold the data. I'm just going to make one content model that holds the content for basically everything in the app. It's probably not the best way to organize things in a real app, but it's simple and it will work for our messing around with the UI kit. So I'm going to add a new group called models, and I'll add a file in there called content. And in here, we're going to have a struct called content. It needs to be hashable. We're going to define a style, enum, for that. And the cases will be standard and title. Going to have 4 properties. We're going to have subtitle, or title, subtitle, image, which is going to be image name. We're just going to use an optional string for now. And it's going to have a style, which is style. And we are going to define a custom initializer for it just so that we can provide default values, because in many places we won't care about anything except the title or the title and the image or whatever. So we're going to have a title, which is a string. We're going to have a subtitle, which is an optional string, an image, which is an optional string, and a style, which is a style. We're going to set default values for these in a second, but first let's finish the initializer. Okay, so for these three, we can have defaults. And that will work just fine. And we're also going to put our stubbed data in here so that we don't have to type it all up later. I'm just going to copy and paste this big long commented out section of code. This has a section type, which we'll get into later. And then there's also some stubbed data, which is all of the various pieces of content in the app. It took a while to type it up. And so that I don't have to do it again and you don't have to do it, I'm just copying and pasting. And we'll uncomment as we go and it becomes relevant. Okay, with all of that boring stuff out of the way, we are now set up and ready to go to actually build this app out. So I'll see you in the next video.